here today. I'm Dalal.
And I'm Katerina.
And can you just please quickly introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name's Secunder Kermani. I'm the Foreign Affairs Correspondent at Channel 4 News, which is one of the UK's main news and current affairs programmes. For the last year or so, I've been doing most of my coverage around the Middle East. Prior to that, I was at the BBC, and I was the Pakistan and Afghanistan correspondent based between Islamabad and Kabul, including when the Taliban were coming into power and after.
Okay, perfect. Could you please begin by giving us an insight into your path in journalism and the key influences and experiences which have shaped your career? And what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your work, especially in regards to its impact on your audience?
So I didn't know that I wanted to be a journalist for a long time. I kind of feel that I fell into the industry a little bit. I began my kind of academic journey with studying history and Spanish at university in the UK, just because I thought those were subjects that were interesting to me, basically, and that were kind of broad enough that whatever career path.
Did you speak Spanish beforehand?
I did it at A-level, like
okay.
IB, so yeah. So I did, but it was something that I really enjoyed, and so I kind of wanted to carry on learning the literature and improving the language, and I figured it would be useful just generally. Then when I finished my bachelor's, I kind of started trying to focus a bit more on what kind of career I wanted to do. Still couldn't really decide, and then in a kind of fit of haste of thinking I needed to do something, looked up and saw that that there was still time to submit applications to be to study a master's in television journalism, and decided to do that while still actually applying for and looking into jobs around like advertising, marketing, that I was kind of also considering as a career path. The more I studied of journalism, the more interested in it I became. And so then by the time I was finishing my master's, I decided I wanted to go into that as a career. And then from there, I started in kind of small freelance positions. It's a difficult industry to get into because unlike something like law or medicine, for example, there's not straightforward career trajectories in the same way or career progression in the same way. It's a bit more ad hoc, it's a bit more insecure. And there's also a lot of interest. Lots more people, I think, want to be journalists than end up either becoming it or kind of finding the roles that they initially hoped to find. I was fortunate and got some breaks and began in first local news in the BBC, then kind of in national news, and then started doing international reporting. And that's kind of how my career progressed within that. And I always thought that the key thing to remember for any journalist is to pitch original stories, basically. That's what our industry thrives on. If you keep thinking about new ways of telling stories and you can find out new stories, get access to information that people don't have, get access to characters, to organizations that people don't have, then that's a crucial way in like progressing within your career. Because even if an editor doesn't want to give you a break and is only looking at more senior colleagues because they're the ones who they know and they've got a greater level of trust in, if you're coming to them with fresh ideas, they're going to pay you attention.
Thank you.
Oh, and you asked about impact.
Yeah, what the most fulfilling aspect of your work is in your opinion?
Look, I mean, sometimes I wonder, is our work having the impact that you'd want it to have? From an ego perspective, it's nice when sometimes people recognize you on the street and praise you, and then you feel that yes, I'm doing something that is kind of recognized and is appreciated. But sometimes we're going into places where people are in really dire situations, at the worst experiences of their life, and we're interviewing them and they're opening up their hearts to us. And I do question myself sometimes about whether we are able to do enough for them as we'd like to. I think overall, the greater level of awareness around like social issues that there is, the better. And so you're nudging things in the right direction. I mean, some journalists can have inflated senses of like self-importance, and it's also good to keep your ego in check and remember that like you will never get as many views on YouTube as like a pop star or like basically, and so feel that you're trying to contribute to a net social good, but remember that you are never the story yourself. At times, it's nice when you have individual cases where people reach out and they want to help, perhaps financially or professionally with someone. So, I had colleagues who've interviewed people and who are traumatized, and a psychologist has gone in touch and said, would this person like some free counseling from me? Like maybe I can help them process their experiences, their trauma. With me, one of the examples that always stands out to me is I did a film, kind of short report in Afghanistan shortly after the Taliban takeover, to a group of young boys as part of this economic crisis that was unraveling in the country. Like so many other young children, had to drop out of school to try and get jobs to help support their families. They had started shoe shining on the streets of Kabul, earning, I guess, maybe at best $1 a day between them, and working very long hours just to try and literally be able to afford maybe a piece of bread that they could help bring back to their families. We put that report out, and a rich British businessman got in touch with me first, and then I connected him to my local colleagues, and he decided that he wanted to contribute financially to their families and basically give them a stipend, as not on the condition that their kids went back into school and received an education. He then expanded that to other kids around the neighborhood as well. So that was something that, primarily the people who deserve credit for that is the businessman who's funding it. But it's nice to think that I played some role in hopefully improving these kids' lives as well.
Thank you.
You've reported from some of the world's most dangerous and unpredictable regions, specifically Afghanistan and Pakistan. Was there a particular interview or moment that had the greatest personal impact on you, and how did it influence your perspective or approach to journalism? I know this question was asked a few times in the speech, but it was just to reiterate.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to think back. I mean, because you speak to so many different people, and I'm always astounded, particularly actually in the developing world, which is where I've done a lot of my work, about how open people are, and there's a differing notion of personal space and personal privacy often in different parts of the world compared to Europe and the West. That as a journalist is refreshing, because it means that people are more open and happy to speak to you despite having gone through horrible experiences. And so it's always a privilege as a journalist to be able to speak to people and to have them open up to you in general. For singular moments about stories that I think have made a big impression. I mean, one story I think that has always resonated with me. It was a documentary I made for the BBC whilst I was in Pakistan. It was of a university student, journalism student actually, who was lynched to death by his classmates on accusations of blasphemy. And we did a kind of investigation looking at the circumstances leading up to his murder. A lot of the kind of his last moments were captured on camera. People were filming as they were beating him. It was really horrific. It was a case that shocked, Pakistani society, and that everyone was talking about there as well. And so we ended up speaking to people accused of taking part in it. We explored the role of particular political groupings in fanning the flames that kind of underlay the tensions that kind of came to a fruition in this particular case. So it felt like we were doing some justice to his memory by really investigating what had happened and interrogating all the reasons for it and trying to understand all the context and nuances around how something so horrific could unfold.
How do you prepare for and manage these high-risk environments that you often report from, both practically and mentally?
So, practically, it would depend where you're going, but I think like planning is really important. And so often thankfully now, like in big organizations, there's quite rigorous processes around these things because it's in their interest as well for no one to be hurt. And so you'll fill out what was called like a high risk form. And in that you will like write out what your plans are, you'll work out like an itinerary where nearest, you'll often do it in conjunction with a high risk specialist. Sometimes they're like former military people, so they've got a good understanding of like conflict zones. You'll work out like where nearest hospitals are, what your communication plan is going to be. Is there going to be mobile signal there? If there's not, like, is there any other way that we can use to keep in touch with people back in London? Is that through satellite phone, for example? Or are there certain spots along our journey or along this trip where we will have mobile signal and we can give updates? If there hasn't been an update after X number of hours, what should be the protocol? Who should be alerted? And you speak to other colleagues who've done similar trips, maybe whether they're international journalists, whether they're local journalists. You speak to local people about the conditions around there. Are the roads safe? What's it like after dark, for example? When I was doing a trip to see the Taliban as they were kind of on the verge of taking over the country, I remember asking a colleague to map out the timing of every airstrike in that province over the past month. And we realized that basically all the airstrikes seemed to happen in the late afternoon into the evening and overnight. So I was like, okay, if we're done by 2 p.m., not that we're going to be like 100% safe, but like the chances are, the probability is that we're being safer. So a lot of it is about managing risks. You work out what's an acceptable risk to take, what ways can I mitigate risk, but also get the job done. Mentally, a lot of it, I think, when you're involved in that process, then you process a lot of that information as you're learning about it. So you're thinking about it yourself. So you're making your own calculations, and everyone will have different thresholds of like where their danger limit is. And you know, the good thing I think that's happened within journalism in more recent years is people are more open about saying, I don't feel comfortable doing this, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Whereas perhaps previously they would have felt under pressure to say, yes, I want to. Now, if anything, normally it's an organization who's saying, we don't want you to go there, it sounds too dangerous. And the journalist on the ground is saying, no, I want to go there, it's fine, I'll be fine. So it's, now, like certainly big organizations adopt a much more cautious approach in that way. But it's also important, like once you're on trips, after trips, to like talk to colleagues about how are you feeling? Are you still feeling all right being here? Afterwards, like decompressing, those things are key. And it's often with talking with other people who've been through those same experiences that it's easiest to unwind, because there's only a certain number of people who have seen what you've seen who are now back in whatever country you're living in, and so who can relate to it in the same way that you can. And so if you can talk about it together, then it's an easier way to kind of to decompress.
Yeah, thank you.
We did some background research, and having faced legal challenges and government scrutiny of your reporting, such as we found out that your laptop was seized under the UK Terrorism Act.
Good research.
How have these experiences shaped your approach to source protection and maintaining journalistic integrity?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, and well done for going back to like 2016 to find that out. Yeah, I mean, look, when that incident happened, that was basically British police saying, counter-terrorism police, wanting to obtain like messages I'd exchanged with a British guy who had gone and joined ISIS in Syria. And my position to them was that this is ridiculous because he's in Syria. Like, what are you going to do? Like, you can't, this is not a crime that this is not something that I can really see you acting upon. Two, if there was information that I had that would save anyone's life, for example, like if he had told me there's a bomb, it's going to go off in this place at this time. Of course, like you'd be under moral duty, I believe, as well as a legal duty to like disclose that information. But these were conversations I had with someone, an individual, about his ideological motivations for joining an extremist group. That I didn't see the relevance for the police for it, and I said it puts me in a really bad position because your journalists had already been accused by extremists of being spies. You're now kind of by seeing it, even though I don't want that to happen. In their minds, you might be further blurring those boundaries, making them think that, oh, when we're speaking to journalists, maybe they are just gonna like hand over stuff to the police, even though, you know, we would exploring any possible ways of resisting it. So I think that source protection is absolutely integral, and it's key to journalists being able to do their work. Frankly, if that same situation developed with me now, I would take an even more robust approach than we took at the time. We did try and explore all legal options to push back on it. But often also when you're at the earliest, more junior stage in your career, then you feel a bit more vulnerable. And, you know, I think, so if anyone ever faces a similar situation like that, to me, I would say, reach out to others, reach out to other journalists and speak to them about, you know, collectively what can be done to push back. I remember when the story broke about it happening, a lot of people messaged me and said, dude, why didn't you tell us? Like, we could have tried to form some joint letter. We could have tried to help in some way. And I had supportive colleagues at the time, but it was like a tough experience because you felt that you were being forced by the state to do something that goes against the grain of our profession, which is source protection, even when those sources are unsavory characters. I mean, the one thing that kind of that in the end meant that I reconciled myself somewhat to it happening was that this person his identity was all, like, basically already, he'd shown his face on TV. It was not a confidential source in that way. And the nature of our conversation, whilst it was a private conversation around arranging an interview, there was nothing that was particularly problematic for his family, for example, or something like that. So it wasn't. It was more the principle that was problematic than the actual nature of the information that was being extracted.
Did you think it was an example or an attempt from the government to mute a kind of narrative that's posed which needs to be posed in international media for those who don't really know much about issues about the Islamic State, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think the motive. It's always hard to read into other people's motivations. Police is separate from government in that, you know, they're not a political entity. Certainly, in terms of the impact, which you can measure, it definitely has a chilling impact on journalists' ability and confidence in being able to speak to people from these kind of groups and these kind of backgrounds. And it has a damaging impact on trust, I think, overall in journalism, and it's a dangerous precedent. For motivation, you have to interview the guys who brought the case, and I'd be interested in hearing about it too.
So these places that you report from, such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Gaza, what has been the most challenging aspect in building trust with local sources in these regions, and how have you overcome that?
It's actually, in some ways, surprisingly easy.
Really?
Because I think the level of distrust in mainstream media that we're seeing right now, that's so prevalent in Western society, that's not really there in the developing world to the same extent. And often a lot of these groups, particularly when they're out of power, it's like politicians. When they're out of power, they want to talk to the media. When they're in power, they want to get rid of you because they don't want to face difficult questions. But when they're out of power, then they're quite happy to talk to you because it's a chance for them to get some of their narrative across, even though they know that they're going to be challenged about it. So they want to often engage with you, and they have a point of view that there is to explore. So yeah, often actually it's like if you have the right contacts, then it hasn't been. It's not always that difficult, and it helps, of course, if you're coming from a major news organization, which they then recognize or they want to engage with, and maybe they feel that they'll have a chance to have their point of view listened to by audiences and policymakers, so somewhere in the West. But the key thing is working with local journalists. Sometimes a lot of them get called fixers. It's a phrase that I kind of feel probably doesn't do them justice, and so local producers is the kind of term or local journalists is the term that I'd prefer. And because they're living in these societies, they're speaking that language. You might go there, you don't speak any of the language. Maybe it's your first time in the country. You'll have read up about the history, hopefully, and done some good research. But that's very different from having a lived experience in a place. And so these local journalists are really your guides in a way, through the society into the story, helping you navigate it, also helping sort out the access. And it's important that all journalists that give them the credit that's due to them, because they're not always on camera, so you wouldn't always necessarily know, and also because they face the greatest risk. So if an armed group, for example, or someone doesn't like, or a politician doesn't like a report that you've done, then you might have skipped back off to Geneva or London, and there's very little they could do to you. But the local journalist who's living next door to him or in the next city a few hours drive away, that's very easy for them to pressure them. But I mean, of course, I think most teams are conscious of that and feel that they have dues and pay that proper attention. But yeah, those are the people who really drive stories forward and help you secure those access points. And often they might work with different people. So I mean, they might work with Channel 4 News one day and then CNN the next week, and because they're just in this area and this is their expertise, this part of the world, access to these kind of groups, for example.
Okay, thank you.
With media increasingly used as a tool in modern conflicts, such as the situation in Gaza, what do you think journalists can do to avoid becoming instruments in these information wars while still informing the public and keeping that neutral perspective?
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember is that we have to always robustly challenge all points of view, interrogate ourselves, interrogate where the information is coming from, interrogate the statements that politicians, that representatives of armed groups are making. You can't just allow people that you just become a platform for them to say whatever they want, and you don't interject within it. And I think sometimes there can be a tendency within journalism to sacrifice some of that challenge in return for greater access. So they think, okay, if I get more time with this, if I go softer with this politician or with this group, then they'll give me more. They'll allow me to go to this place, or they'll give me I'll get an interview with a higher ranking official, or I'll get a longer interview. That's a dangerous slope to start going down. But as long as we're self-critical about our own work and make sure that we're talking to different sides, then I think media still has a key role to play in helping the world understand what's happening in these places.
So to build on that, what can we as media audiences and as a society do to avoid becoming so susceptible to this polarization and to this distortion of facts often brought about by information wars?
Yeah, I think engaging critically with the material that you're reading is really crucial. Think about what the source is, what agenda that person might have. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because someone's got an agenda, you discount what they're saying, but it means that you're going to counteract it or balance it out by reading more widely. I mean, the problem there is, how much time does anyone have? Yeah. I mean, you can't, every news article you read, you can't be okay, I'm going to read 20 different versions from 20 different news organizations about this one thing. And that's part of the problem that I think audiences face now, is that there's just so much information out there.
Yeah.
They're like picking, what am I going to engage with, what is reliable, and then what am I going to invest my time in, my emotional time in engaging with. And so I think, but in general, just adopting like an inherently critical approach is really crucial.
Okay. Thank you.
And reading widely.
Yeah.
In an industry that's constantly evolving and often unpredictable, especially with new technologies and AI and shifting public trust, what keeps you resilient and motivated in this field?
I think it's the people that you meet, and the fact that it's such a privilege to be able to travel around, right now at my stage of my career, around the world, and meet people who are in extraordinary, often terrible circumstances, and who often, despite that, are warm, are courteous, are welcoming, have hope, see you as something that can hopefully contribute to an improvement in their lives. It's a kind of sense of it's a sense of duty to those people, and that's what also motivates you to carry on, to keep doing, to keep traveling, to keep working, because you know that there's so many people like that around the world, and so many people like that around the world who want to have an opportunity to just say to talk about their experiences, to have their voice heard.
How do you navigate the balance between maintaining journalistic objectivity and engaging with the human dimension of the stories you cover, especially in very emotionally charged and conflict-ridden environments?
So I mean, there's definitely been instances where, like from all sides, where I've done like interviews, and then you shed a tear when it's happening, because you're hearing about some terrible experiences from people. I think the way I like to see it is you have to allow yourself to care enough that you do your job properly, that you do emotional justice to the people you're talking to and the stories that you're telling, but you have to be detached enough that you can give those stories the credibility that they deserve and the impartiality that's needed for that. So like a doctor, for example, or a surgeon who's carrying out an amputation, if you just said to me, hey, Secunder, go and chop this guy's leg off right now, I can't do that. Like, even if he wants it or he needs it, I can't do it. But a surgeon has like obviously rationalized within himself and detached himself like professionally enough that he's like, this is in this person, this is in the greater social good, this is in this person's own interest as well, and so I'm going to be able to perform this act that otherwise would be, impossible for us to do. So I kind of sometimes put myself in that mind frame that you're looking at it like a doctor, as a professional, and so, like I say, you care enough that you do emotional justice to your interviewee. And you allow yourself to feel in the moment, and to convey some of that feeling in your script, but it doesn't mean that you stop being impartial or portraying other points of view as well as part of that same report, because that's also needed to understand whatever it is you're reporting on.
And just a final question for our younger audience. What skills or qualities do you believe are essential for young people who want to make an impact in journalism today, and any advice you would give for those considering that career path?
I think reading widely is really crucial. Confidence. If you don't have confidence, fake confidence. I've done that for large parts of my career as well. I think most people have, but force yourself into speaking in situations where it might feel more comfortable to just stay silent but speak up, because a lot of journalism, particularly in broadcast, is about presence, and it's not an easy thing to do, but you can, if it doesn't come naturally to you, you can grow into it. And so I think that's one thing. And then if you study and read widely, as I say, then one, you're engaging with the work of other journalists. So you're looking at the kind of work of people that you hope to perhaps one day emulate and go and do. And also, then I think if you can start working in any small area, like whether it's your school newspaper, school TV channel, websites, local newspapers that you can volunteer with, like on social media, anything you can do in your spare time that shows when it comes to applying for university, for example, or beyond, that you have some kind of portfolio. And the good thing about that is, social media gives you a platform. It's hard to sometimes get views, I know, but like no one's going to be like looking at it and say, well, why have you not got 1 million views for your video when you were 13 years old? People will understand. But anything you can do to kind of, because it's an oversubscribed to industry that demonstrates your passion for it, I think will serve you well. But the main thing is, if you're interested in the area and you enjoy working on it, then I think that translates and that will come across. And think of which areas within journalism that you're most interested in as well. It might be the environment, it might be conflict, it might be politics, it might be law and order, and those areas might change as well. But have an area that you find most interesting and kind of start off working there and then see where it leads you. Because when you do one story on, one topic when you do one story, say to do with crime, then you'll build more contacts from that community in that area. You'll understand more of the background issues. So the next story you do, you'll be even better informed. You'll have a greater number of people that you can call up to talk to about it or to get tip-offs about it. So that's important as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.